Hi everyone, so today we're going to look at evolution. So let's do this. Right, start learning. Okay, natural selection. Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection proposed that all species have evolved from simple life forms that first appeared on Earth more than 3 billion years ago. So the process of evolution is by natural selection. So let's have a look at what this actually is. So natural selection says that in a population, there is genetic variation. Different individual animals in a population or species have different combinations of genes. Now, genes are short sections of DNA. So these genes will be different in different organisms. 2. So the survival of the fittest. Individuals that are best adapted to the environment will have a greater chance of survival. So if they have an adaptation, like a longer beak, perhaps that is better suited to eating their food source, so they're more likely to survive. Or an elephant that has a longer trunk is more likely to eat more things, so they're more likely to survive. Successful breeding. Individuals with the best chance of survival are more likely to breed successfully because they survive. So an elephant that has a longer trunk, more likely to survive, more likely to breed successfully. So these best characteristics survive. The characteristics responsible for the greater chance of survival are more likely to be passed on to the next generation. Okay, let's have a look at some questions. Which of the following are true according to the principle of natural selection? So what we've just learned. So individuals display genetic variation. Yes, that's correct. People have different variations of genes. So the characteristics that maximize survival chances are passed on. Yeah, that's correct, because characteristics which makes you more likely to survive, you're more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on those characteristics. So those with the best characteristics are more likely to breed or less likely to breed. Well, they're more likely to breed, aren't they? Because they're more likely to survive. Yep. So natural selection, we've got to put them in the correct order. So what is the first step of natural selection? So we've got individuals within a population display genetic variation. And what is the second step? So we've got genes which make them better adapted to the environment will have a greater chance of survival. And then because they've got a greater chance of survival, they're more likely to breed. And because of this, the individuals that survive are more likely to pass on to the next generation those characteristics because they will breed. Yay, so that's correct. Right, so why was this controversial? When Darwin proposed this idea, he got a lot of opposition from the scientific community, and so his ideas weren't accepted very fast. So let's have a look at some reasons why this happened. So one was religion. Natural selection challenged the belief that God created the natural world. So in evolution, it says that organisms will gradually change over time to become different species. And in religion, in the Bible, it said that species were created exactly, perfectly as they are, so they weren't changing. So many people weren't happy about that. Genes hadn't been discovered yet either. And so genes are the method of passing characteristics onto the next generation, so inheritance. Genes are inherited from your parents. But these weren't discovered yet, so Darwin couldn't actually tell people how characteristics were passed between generations. Some people said that there was also inconclusive evidence, i.e. he didn't have enough evidence to prove evolution. For example, genes hadn't been discovered yet. What have we got here? We've got a little video. You can watch that yourselves. I'll skip over that and move on to the next section. So which of these was not an explanation for the slow acceptance of the theory of natural selection? There was already good evidence for a different theory. There wasn't enough evidence for his theory. The evidence was viewed as inconclusive. Yep, that's correct. It challenged religious views. That's correct. Genes weren't discovered yet, so it's the first one. So another theory was proposed, and this was the theory of inheritance by acquired characteristics. And this was proposed by Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and he used the example of giraffes. So he said, giraffes had very long necks. This means they can reach the upper branches of trees to feed. Like the picture. An early giraffe, so a long time ago, these giraffes had shorter necks, and so they had to stretch to reach their food on the tops of trees. And he thought that because they were stretching all the time to reach the trees, that their necks got longer. And then he believed that these newly acquired characteristics would then be passed on to the next generation. But it's actually been proved that Lamarck's theory is not correct. So changes that happen within an organism's lifetime, for example, him saying that the necks got longer within a lifetime, these are not passed on to future generations. So now we've got to click the wrong word. Oh no, we don't. We've got to look at Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics to give an example. Let's have a look at some examples. So his example was the giraffe, which we just talked about. So again, to recap that, giraffes have long necks. Earlier giraffes had shorter necks, so they just stretched to reach their food. They continually stretched, so the giraffe's necks got longer within a lifetime, and Lamarck believed that these would then be passed on to the next generation. So I think we've understood that well, haven't we? So we've got a nice little picture of a giraffe here. As we were talking about earlier, Lamarck believed that giraffes' necks got longer because they had to stretch to reach trees. So natural selection was proposed by Charles Darwin. So I'll type that in. Nice. In 1859, and he theorised that all species have evolved from simple life forms that first appeared on Earth more than 3 billion years ago. So now we've got to give an example of Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, which we've seen before, which is that of the giraffe. So we've understood that well. So, some reasons behind the slow acceptance of Darwin's evolutionary thinking. These were evidence regarded as inconclusive, that's right. Religion, that's another one, because it challenged the belief that God created everything equally. And also, genes have not yet been discovered. So I'll just skip the video. Slow acceptance again, so we know that now this is genes have not yet been discovered. Religion is another one. And inconclusive evidence. So Lamarckian evolution, we've got to drag this into correct order. So earlier giraffes, that's first, they had a shorter neck, so they have to stretch to reach their food. And then, because they were stretching all the time, this resulted in elongation of giraffes' necks within a lifetime. And Lamarck believed that this newly acquired characteristic would then be passed on to the next generation. And that's correct. Yay, we've done it. 99% memory. Let's store that in Vietnam. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.